Hello, everyone, and welcome to ADFIAP's 44th annual members meeting. It's an honor to be here and to continue this wonderful session. I think nobody can deny that we are in the midst of a planetary emergency. The interconnected crisis of biodiversity loss, climate change, COVID-19, and the associated health and economic devastation are pushing our sustainable development goals further out of reach. Of course, COVID has delivered one of the biggest shocks to our economies and health systems, but in itself, it's an environmental problem and is brought about by our unsustainable production and consumption. We know that the transmission of most zoonotic diseases happens indirectly, and it's interlinked with the biodiversity crisis. For example, some of the drivers for the transmission of zoonotic disease include our quest for more animal protein, the unsustainable intensification of our agriculture, and also our unsustainable extraction of natural resources driven by urbanization and land use change, but also climate change. And climate change is increasing the spread of certain diseases, and it's complicating our efforts to combat others. We know that the seasonality and the weather are two of the major factors which control the rate at which viruses such as the flu infect humans. And it's predicted that in the near future, due to warming temperatures, the timing and distribution and severity of future pandemics will increase. Climate change and biodiversity loss, they are interlinked. They are in a vicious cycle and they exacerbate each other. For example, land use change that's associated with infrastructure is one of the principal drivers of climate change by destroying carbon stocks. It also leads to biodiversity loss as natural ecosystems are converted to other uses. And this leads to more biodiversity loss, of course, and emissions which induce warming temperatures. So to be effective, solutions to climate change and biodiversity loss must address these complex interdependencies. Previous policies have focused on addressing these issues independently or in isolation, but those policies that simultaneously address the synergies between climate change and biodiversity, they offer the opportunity to maximize co-benefits and help meet our development ambitions. Now, I've mentioned nature a couple of times. You know, it is the sum of biodiversity, natural capital, and ecosystem services, and is the foundation of our well-being and economic activity. It provides ecosystem services worth of over 150 trillion every year. And much of it is not being included into financial accounting, or it's just quite difficult to do so. Unfortunately, around 5 trillion of US dollars are lost every year because of declining functionality in our ecosystems. And this is a tangible and a pervasive issue for financial institutions because the dependence on declining ecosystem services leads to physical risks, and impacts on ecosystem services and biodiversity can lead to a transition and reputational risk. At the same time, financial institutions tend to disproportionately lend in countries that have relatively high levels of biodiversity, high resource intensive economies, and weak environmental regulation. For example, in Asia Pacific, we know that is the epicenter of infrastructure expansion, and it threatens many of the world's most biologically rich ecosystems. About 50% of the global total is in Asia in terms of vulnerable nature. At the same time, financial institutions in Asia Pacific are putting the largest nature at risk by quite a wide margin of 550 billion US dollars, or 51% of the total in the world. Now, our current policies regarding climate are putting us on the pathway of about 3 degrees warming by the year 2100. Even if we hit our targets and pledges, which will end up around 2.5 degrees, and I'm not quite sure if we are going to meet this target, it's still going to lead to a lot of impact. And although 0.5 degrees, for example, it doesn't sound significant at first, it can make a lot of difference. For example, the difference between a 2-degree scenario versus a 1.5 degree scenario would lead to heating effects that are 2.6 times worse, as well as species loss, which is 2 to 3 times worse. So it's quite impactful. At the same time, economically, we may see up to 25% loss in our species, in our GDP from chronic risk alone. And this is probably going to increase if we include our acute physical risk and transition risks. And different regions will be affected to various degrees. The tropics could see a higher productivity loss, and Asia is especially exposed. We know that a number of countries in ASEAN are in the top 10 most affected by climate change. I like to remind everyone of the Article 2.5 of the UNFCCC, making finance consistent with climate goals, where 180 countries as of November 2018 have committed to make finance flows more consistent with the pathway towards low emissions. And that includes raising ambition, driving action, and tracking progress. So how sustainable our recovery has been? We're not very sustainable. Only a limited number of countries have included biodiversity measures in their recovery packages. And, you know, uncertainty caused by the pandemic, fueled by the economic downturn, could trigger shifts away from our global objective. Something that has never been in the top could be downgraded further, as, for example, national governments focus on addressing immediate needs, health, supporting small businesses, and so on. But the pandemic has also enabled us to reassess some of our objectives. All environmental risks, while not in the top 10, are gaining awareness, but we need to capitalize on this awareness and ensure consistent long-term progress towards tackling our interconnected global challenges. And one area where we can chart a more sustainable way forward is infrastructure. This is the backbone of our economy. It's linked to all of the SDGs, and it tends to lock in positive and negative impacts in the long term. There's also a large number of stimulus packages that focus on infrastructure, and therefore we have a great opportunity to get infrastructure right. Already, DFIs have been pioneers in developing detailed environmental and social risk frameworks, in creating international standards and guidelines regarding the sustainability impacts of projects, for example, the Equator principles. But while ESG integration in development finance has been increasing over the last decades, the underlying political agenda still sets the tone, and sometimes this can lag some of the sustainability requirements. So for this reason, World Wide Fund for Nature and ADFIAB have embarked on a joint study to support sustainable infrastructure investment and ESG integration at regional DFIs in Asia Pacific. We've used a mixed method approach, including review of public disclosure, semi-structured interviews, and a survey against a framework that included pillars such as purpose, policies, processes, products, and portfolio. And the DFI showed a lot of good progress with products. Most DFIs are issuing green financial instruments and products, even technical assistance for green infrastructure. There are also specialized funds for addressing the SDGs. Also, a lot of DFIs are including sustainability into their vision, mission, and strategies, and to a lesser extent into their mandates. The areas that lack progress include processes, policies, and portfolio. Not all DFIs tend to disclose their environmental and social risk across all portfolios. Not all of them are using sustainable infrastructure standards or screening or various methods for assessing biodiversity risks. And this idea of assessing biodiversity is quite an area that requires more effort. There's a lack of understanding regarding how to quantify biodiversity risks, what tools to measure in data sets. DFIs have also showed fair compliance with the people pillar. Most senior management have oversight over sustainability, but not all DFIs are appraising staff with regards to sustainability indicators. On COVID-19, there's been a recognition of our relationship with nature, and it has catalyzed conversations on green recovery. However, a large number of DFIs have focused on supporting immediate needs, such as I mentioned earlier, small businesses and supporting the health system. And I think the goal is to capitalize on this momentum and to carry on focusing on green recovery opportunities. I'd just like to highlight that the difference between addressing economic issues and health issues and biodiversity is a false dichotomy. They're kind of more or less the same, and they need to be tackled at the same time. There is a growing number of interesting financial instruments such as debt for nature swaps and green bonds, which provide opportunities. DFIs have emerged as a source of finance and preferred vehicles during times of crisis such as now. And they're on different levels from response to recovery. The progress varies across regions, but I think everyone is heading towards recovery and growth. The key message here is that there's not enough money in the economy to reconfigure the old system and create a new one. DFIs must prepare better projects. And we already know that well-targeted investments in clean energy, for example, can generate more jobs and better return on investment than brown alternatives. So to conclude, I think DFIs have the responsibility not only to respond adequately to the pandemic, but also to rethink the way in which they operate and how they can best support the design of a just and sustainable economic systems. They need to go beyond do no harm and become more transformative. One way they can do that is by integrating climate and biodiversity positive institutional commitments and updating their mandates. And they can start doing so by incorporating this into COVID recovery finance. They must reorientate themselves to support a different private sector. So take on more risk and focus on development returns rather than just financial returns in an integrated natural capital concept to allow for more risk taking, and reinforce the environmental and social impact assessment, robust integration of ESG factors into risk management frameworks, and think of risk governance strategy and culture, risk control and frameworks, and reporting and disclosure. And finally, DFIs are not alone. World Wide Fund for Nature provides training and capacity building to financial institutions using the latest science in collaboration with leading institutions. We've just launched an ASFI Academy with e-learning courses for financial professionals in infrastructure and agriculture, and there are more to come. So with this, I'd like to thank you everyone for listening and wish you a very productive event. Thank you.